had long hair.
Okay. What was he wearing?
He was wearing a black or dark blue t-shirt.
Okay.
And some blue jeans.
Okay.
And he was wearing a hat.
Was he talking with your grandma?
He was screaming at her.
He was screaming at her. Do you remember what he was saying?
He said, "Give me the money or I'll kill you."
Okay. And then what happened?
And then I was scared, so I ran back in the room.
Okay.
And then I woke back up in the morning.
Okay. So after you ran back to the room, you didn't see this man again. Okay. Then what happened?
I tried waking up my grandma and she wouldn't get up.
Okay.
And then I noticed that she didn't budge or anything. So then I went, "Mama!" And then I yelled it 7 times. And then I got scared.
Okay. And then what'd you do?
So I was looking for the phone.
Imagine being sentenced to life in prison for a terrible tragedy involving your own family, with the only witness testifying against you being your 6-year-old niece. This isn't a Hollywood movie. It is the real-life nightmare of Clarence Elkins. Stripped of his freedom for 7 long years in a maximum security facility, Clarence lost almost everything. Yet amidst that deepest darkness, the extraordinary resilience of his wife Melinda and a single cigarette butt, quietly retrieved behind bars, orchestrated one of the most spectacular turnarounds in legal history. The quiet town of Barberton, Ohio, awoke to an unfathomable tragedy in the early hours of June 6, 1998. In the supposed safety of her own home, 58-year-old Judy Johnson abruptly passed away due to a deeply unfortunate and harrowing event. Present in the house during this devastating ordeal was her 6-year-old granddaughter, Brooke Sutton. Though the young girl miraculously survived the terrifying circumstances, she endured an unimaginable emotional shock that would forever alter the trajectory of her life and her family's future. The shadows of that night left the little girl utterly disoriented, setting the stage for a profound miscarriage of justice that would take years to unravel.
I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard someone screaming. I was scared because he was a guy and I was so little.
Okay.
He hit me with something or kicked me or something.
Fleeing the terrifying scene, Brooke sought refuge in the darkness, running desperately to the home of a neighbor, Tanya Brazil. In a state of sheer panic and vulnerability, the traumatized child knocked on the door seeking immediate safety and comfort. However, the sequence of events that followed defied logic, empathy, and standard protocol. Instead of instantly sheltering the distressed girl and summoning the authorities, Tanya left the frightened child waiting for a prolonged period. During this critical window, the neighbor engaged in a highly questionable interaction with Brooke.
"I'm sorry to tell you this, but my grandma died, and I need somebody to get my mom for me. I'm all alone. Somebody can hold my grandma. No, please, but you can hold me as soon as you can. Bye."
So when you couldn't reach anyone, what did you do?
I ran to my grandmother's next door neighbor's house.
Okay.
And I knocked on their door and they came and she asked me what happened to my cheek.
Okay, why'd she ask you that?
Because she noticed that my cheek was black and blue and stuff.
How'd it get that way?
I don't know. He hit me with something or kicked me or something.
Rather than simply calming her down, Tanya began to continuously plant a specific damaging narrative into the highly suggestible mind of the 6-year-old.
Clarence killed my grandma. My uncle Clarence killed my grandma. I don't have no reason to lie about it.
She repeatedly suggested and reinforced the idea that Brooke's uncle, Clarence Elkins, was the individual responsible for the next tragic events. For a child who had just experienced severe psychological trauma, these persistent suggestions quickly morphed into a distorted reality, blurring the lines between what she actually witnessed in the dark and what an adult was compelling her to believe. Armed with this fragile and heavily manipulated testimony, law enforcement rapidly mobilized. The authorities descended upon the Elkins family residence, a quiet home completely unaware of the looming storm. In a chaotic and tense display of force, The initial apprehension was entirely misguided. Officers forcefully detained Clarence's bewildered 15-year-old son before realizing their grave error. They quickly redirected their focus, moving to arrest Clarence himself. He was completely caught off guard, deeply confused, and entirely oblivious to the tragedy that had just befallen his mother-in-law, let alone the severe accusations forming against him. The sheer bewilderment of that morning remained etched in his memory for years to come. Reflecting on the surreal nature of his sudden detainment, Clarence recalled the disorienting sequence of events.
"Oh, what's going on?" And they said, "Turn around, put your hands up, and walk backwards slowly." And I'm like, "You got the wrong house here or something." And then eventually they told me about a half an hour later that I was a suspect in a murder of my then mother-in-law, Judith Johnson. And I said, "You have the wrong person. There's nobody here that ever has done anything like that." And they said, well, they had a witness, and it was the 6-year-old girl.
This profound moment of disbelief marked the tragic beginning of a relentless nightmare. An innocent man was swept away by a flawed investigation, leaving a family completely torn apart.
What do you want to happen next?
I want my Uncle Clarence to get out of jail, and I want the man who killed my grandma to be punished.
As the courtroom doors swung open, the trial of Clarence Elkins commenced, heavily shadowed by a profound and glaring absence of concrete proof. In any standard judicial proceeding, physical evidence serves as the bedrock of a conviction. Yet, in this highly charged courtroom, investigators failed to present a single microscopic trace linking Clarence to the location of the tragic event. There were no fingerprints, no biological markers, and no material clues to suggest he had ever stepped foot inside his mother-in-law's house that fateful night. Furthermore, the defense presented a robust and verifiable alibi. At the exact time the incident occurred, Clarence was documented to be at a location miles away. Geographically and logistically, it was highly improbable, if not entirely impossible, for him to have made the journey, been involved in the incident, and returned unnoticed. Despite this overwhelming void of physical evidence, and a solid alibi that should have introduced immediate reasonable doubt, the prosecution pushed forward, anchoring their entire case on the fragile shoulders of a deeply traumatized child. The courtroom's atmosphere grew exceptionally tense when 6-year-old Brooke Sutton was called to the witness stand. For a little girl still reeling from the profound emotional shock of losing her grandmother, the immense pressure of the judicial system was crushing.
Do you think today that Uncle Clarence was the same man you saw in the kitchen that night with your grandma?
No.
Initially, in the immediate aftermath of the incident, Brooke's recollections were understandably uncertain. She had merely stated that the figure in the dark looked like her uncle. However, under the heavy gaze of the jury, the intimidating environment of the court, and the persistent influence of the adults around her, a devastating shift occurred. Guided by a narrative that had been repeatedly planted in her mind since that tragic morning, the hesitant child transformed her uncertain observation into a definitive identification. She pointed at the defendant and stated that it was undeniably her Uncle Clarence. This monumental change in her testimony became the pivotal cornerstone of the trial, effectively overshadowing the glaring lack of scientific evidence. Years later, the immense burden of that coerced testimony would weigh heavily on a grown Brooke, revealing the disturbing reality of how her childhood confusion was manipulated by figures of authority. Reflecting on the heartbreaking ordeal, she bravely admitted the profound doubts that had always lingered in her mind. Her adult confession peeled back the layers of the prosecution's strategy.
She said, "I was never really sure." And I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I said that originally, but then I started having doubts, and I tried to tell the prosecutors, and they kept telling me, no, we have all this other evidence about Clarence being a bad man. You're doing a good thing helping us send him to prison."
This poignant admission laid bare a tragic failure of the justice system. The authorities, desperate to close the case, had prioritized a swift conviction over the fragile truth of a distressed child. In the end, the jury, swayed by the emotional weight of a little girl's tearful yet heavily influenced words, delivered a crushing verdict. Based almost entirely on the inaccurate and pressured testimony of a confused 6-year-old, Clarence Elkins was sentenced to be permanently isolated from society. The gavel fell, sealing the fate of an innocent man and marking the beginning of a dark, arduous chapter behind bars.
Picture. Who is that on that picture?
My Uncle Clarence.
That's your Uncle Clarence. All right. Now I want to show you another picture. This is a bit bigger. The person in that picture. Who's in that picture?
A guy.
A guy. Do you recognize the guy?
Yes, but only if he had longer bangs.
Only if he had longer bangs. Okay.
But I noticed when I was looking in by the doorway in my grandmother's house, the guy had brown eyes.
Brown eyes, okay. And what color eyes does that man have?
Brown.
He has brown eyes. Okay. Do you know what color eyes your Uncle Clarence has?
Blue, because I stayed the night at my Aunt Mindy's house and I looked at her picture in the garage and he had blue eyes.
Clarence had blue eyes. Okay. And the man who did this to your grandma, what color eyes did he have?
Brown.
He had brown eyes. Okay.
While Clarence Elkins was unjustly isolated behind bars, his wife Melinda found herself navigating a different kind of prison on the outside. As both the grieving daughter of the beloved woman who passed away and the loyal spouse of the wrongly convicted, she occupied an incredibly solitary and heartbreaking position. She was one of the very few who steadfastly believed in her husband's absolute innocence. Choosing to stand by Clarence meant facing severe societal backlash. She endured immense misunderstanding, harsh judgment, and painful alienation from her own community. Yet, Melinda willingly absorbed the scorn, sacrificing her own peace to fiercely protect the man she knew was falsely accused. Her unwavering love and conviction became an unbreakable shield against the crushing weight of public opinion, proving that her commitment to justice was far stronger than the isolation she endured. Her remarkable resilience was fueled by a profound sense of duty to both her husband and her late mother. Standing before her mother's resting place, Melinda made a solemn vow that would define the next challenging chapter of her life. It was a deeply personal pledge to uncover the hidden reality of that tragic night, no matter the cost or the time it required. Reflecting on the profound driving force behind her relentless pursuit of truth, Melinda later shared the depth of her commitment.
To her, I promise you, I will find out who did this to you, if it takes me the rest of my life.
This heartfelt promise ignited an extraordinary grassroots investigation led by a woman who simply refused to let injustice prevail. Refusing to surrender to despair, Melinda transformed her overwhelming grief into decisive action. With no formal background in law enforcement, she meticulously compiled a comprehensive list of individuals who were present near the vicinity during the time of the incident. Taking matters into her own hands, she courageously ventured into local public spaces, quietly observing those on her list. Acting as an amateur sleuth, she covertly approached them to gather discarded items that might carry crucial biological material. Whether it was a forgotten drinking glass at a local establishment or a discarded cigarette butt, Melinda carefully collected these potential clues. She then brought them home, safely storing the biological samples in her own freezer, hoping that advancing science would eventually reveal the answers the authorities had missed. Every item she gathered represented a beacon of hope, a tangible piece of a complex puzzle she was determined to solve. Realizing the immense magnitude of her undertaking, Melinda eventually sought professional expertise to elevate her search. She joined forces with Martin Yant, a seasoned former investigator who possessed the critical eye needed to dissect the flawed official narrative. Together, they meticulously combed through the original case files, reevaluating every document and report. Their collaborative effort yielded significant results, uncovering numerous critical clues and glaring inconsistencies that had been entirely overlooked during the initial processing of the scene. This powerful alliance marked a pivotal turning point, transforming a seemingly hopeless situation into a rigorous, methodical pursuit of truth.
Do you remember the night that your grandma died? Okay. Can you tell us what happened that night?
Me and my grandma, we went to my cousin's birthday party.
Uh-huh.
And then, maybe 9:30, we went over to my Aunt Pat's house. And then we went home.
Okay.
And then we were watching her favorite show. And then she told me to go to bed.
Okay.
When I went to bed, she opened the door, I think, to get some air. Then I think she fell asleep.
The relentless pursuit of truth finally caught a glimmer of hope when the esteemed Innocence Project stepped in to support Melinda's tireless efforts. By 2004, significant advancements in analytical technology had opened new doors that were previously locked during the initial investigation. Utilizing newly developed, highly sensitive scientific testing methods, forensic experts were able to extract and analyze the microscopic biological traces left at the scene. The results of these tests were both groundbreaking and profoundly vindicating. The genetic markers definitively belonged to an unidentified mystery man. This undeniable objective scientific evidence, confirming what Melinda had known deep in her heart all along, her husband was absolutely innocent and had absolutely no involvement in the tragic incident that took her mother's life. However, the path to freedom was still obstructed by immense, frustrating legal barriers. One would naturally assume that such clear, objective scientific data would immediately unlock the prison doors and correct the wrongful conviction. But the justice system proved to be rigidly defensive of its original verdict. Despite the compelling new findings presented by the legal team, the initial judicial response was a staunch refusal to review or reopen the case. Authorities argued against the validity of the new tests, heavily suggesting that the biological samples might have been compromised, altered, or mishandled over the years. This bureaucratic resistance was a crushing blow to the family, highlighting a deeply flawed system that seemingly prioritized upholding past decisions over acknowledging glaring mistakes and delivering true justice to an innocent man. Refusing to be defeated by the courtroom's closed doors and the system's stubbornness, Melinda channeled her profound frustration back into her independent investigation. Poring over public records, old articles, and community files, she meticulously began to narrow down her list of potential suspects. It was during this exhaustive deep dive that a chilling identity surfaced: E.M. This particular individual possessed a highly complex and deeply troubled past, marked by a long history of severe behavioral issues and concerning encounters with the law. But the most shocking and unsettling revelation was yet to come. As Melinda carefully pieced together the geographical and social connections from that era, she discovered a terrifying link. E.M. was not a random stranger wandering the streets. He was a close acquaintance of Tanya Brazil. In a heartbreaking twist of fate that almost defied belief, E.M. was actually residing in the exact same neighboring house that 6-year-old Brooke had desperately run to for help on that dark, confusing morning. The very place the terrified child had sought safety was intimately connected to the true perpetrator. The pieces of this complex puzzle were finally coming together, revealing a narrative far more intricate than anyone had ever imagined. Melinda's unwavering dedication had brought her to the very doorstep of the truth, setting the stage for a daring final move. If you find this journey of resilience and the relentless pursuit of justice inspiring, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. By subscribing, you support our mission to continue sharing powerful, real-life stories of hope, healing, and the ultimate triumph of truth. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where an unbelievable coincidence behind bars changes everything.
Remember what happened after that? You were probably sleeping. Okay.
And then I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard someone screaming.
Okay, so you heard some screaming, and then what did you do?
I went by the doorway of my grandmother's kitchen, and I saw a guy.
Just as the legal avenues seemed entirely exhausted and hope began to dwindle, the universe intervened with a twist of fate so extraordinary that it defied all statistical probability. E.M., the very individual Melinda's relentless investigation had pinpointed, found himself back in the custody of the state due to an unrelated violation. In a staggering coincidence that felt almost orchestrated by a higher power, he was transferred to the exact same correctional facility and placed in the very same cell block as Clarence Elkins. For years, Clarence had been confined within those walls, enduring the heavy weight of an unjust sentence, completely unaware that the key to his exoneration would eventually walk right through those heavy iron doors. When Clarence recognized the man from the detailed information his legal team and wife had shared, he was struck by the profound gravity of the situation. The true perpetrator was now breathing the same air, walking the same corridors, and living just steps away from the innocent man who was serving his time. Understanding the immense danger and the delicate nature of this unprecedented opportunity, Clarence knew he had to act with absolute precision and profound caution. He was well aware of E.M.'s volatile background and highly unpredictable temperament. Any direct confrontation or suspicious behavior could not only jeopardize his fragile chance at freedom, but also deeply compromise his personal safety. Instead of succumbing to the overwhelming rush of emotions or reacting impulsively, Clarence harnessed an extraordinary level of patience and self-control. He became a silent, meticulous observer in a highly tense environment, watching EM's daily routines with a vigilant eye. He knew that to definitively prove his innocence and break the stubborn legal deadlock, he desperately needed to obtain a biological sample from EM to compare against the mystery evidence held by the authorities. This required a flawless, risk-free plan, waiting for the perfect fleeting moment when he could secure the crucial item without drawing the slightest bit of attention. The defining moment of Clarence's long, arduous journey finally arrived during a seemingly mundane afternoon in the prison's common area. Clarence quietly watched as EM finished a cigarette and casually discarded the remaining butt into a communal space before turning and walking away. Recognizing that this small discarded item held the absolute power to rewrite history and restore his life, Clarence moved with quiet, focused determination. Ensuring no one was watching, he approached the area. Using a clean piece of tissue paper to prevent any contamination from his own touch, he carefully retrieved the discarded item. With his heart pounding, he discreetly concealed the invaluable evidence, eventually tucking it safely between the pages of a thick book, a concordance he kept in his cell. Shortly after, through highly secure and confidential channels, Clarence managed to mail the concealed item directly to his defense attorney. This bold, non-confrontational act of quiet brilliance was the ultimate leap of faith, setting into motion the final undeniable revelation of the truth. The tension that had deeply enveloped the legal team and the Elkins family for years culminated in an agonizing, yet astonishingly swift, wait for the laboratory results. When the comprehensive scientific analysis was finally completed, within a remarkably short turnaround of just 48 hours, the findings were nothing short of monumental. The microscopic genetic markers meticulously extracted from the secretly retrieved cigarette butt provided an absolute flawless match to the mystery trace found at the original scene so many years prior. The statistical probability of an error was practically non-existent, representing a mathematical certainty that could not be debated or ignored. This wasn't merely a piece of compelling evidence. It was the definitive, undeniable truth cast in the rigid, objective certainty of modern science. The lingering shadows of doubt that had plagued the initial judicial proceedings and clouded the community's judgment for over 7 years were instantly eradicated by the sheer clarity of the DNA sequence. The complex puzzle was finally complete, entirely absolving the man who had suffered so profoundly in silence. Armed with this irrefutable scientific proof, the dedicated attorneys from the Innocence Project wasted no time in presenting their groundbreaking findings to the highest echelons of the state's legal hierarchy. They brought the flawless DNA match directly to the Attorney General, anticipating the usual bureaucratic resistance that had historically stalled such appeals. However, what unfolded next was a profoundly rare and deeply commendable moment in the history of the justice system. Recognizing the immense gravity of the undeniable evidence and the profound tragedy of the wrongful conviction, the Attorney General chose the path of absolute integrity over institutional pride. In a remarkably unprecedented move, the highest legal authority in the state publicly and courageously sided with the convicted man. Acknowledging the grave error made by the investigative and judicial branches, the Attorney General officially advocated for the immediate dismissal of all past charges, passionately demanding that the unjust sentence be overturned without any further administrative delay. This honorable intervention proved that while the system could deeply fail its citizens, it also possessed the rare capacity to humbly self-correct when confronted with the blinding light of the truth. The culmination of this extraordinary, arduous journey arrived just before the holiday season, bringing a profound sense of closure and miraculous rebirth. In late 2005, the heavy, imposing iron doors of the correctional facility finally swung open for Clarence Elkins, not as a supervised inmate, but as a completely exonerated, fully vindicated free man.
You ready to come home? Then get your stuff packed, honey, because you're coming home today.
What do you think of Melinda's efforts?
Melinda is very courageous and a strong person, and she never gave up.
Stepping out into the open air, he was met by his devoted wife, Melinda, and his loving family, emotionally embracing a society he had been unjustly separated from for more than 7 grueling years. The tearful reunion marked the end of an agonizing nightmare and the beautiful dawn of a hard-fought restoration. Following this momentous release, the legal focus rightfully and swiftly shifted to the actual perpetrator. Confronted by the undeniable genetic evidence that Clarence had so bravely and intelligently secured, EM eventually faced the full legal consequences of his past actions, taking formal responsibility for the tragic events of that long-ago morning. The true narrative was finally and permanently established, balancing the scales of justice and closing a painful chapter with the ultimate enduring triumph of truth. Stepping out of the prison gates was the end of a profound legal nightmare. But for Clarence Elkins, it was only the beginning of a complex and deeply personal battle. Although his physical freedom had been fully restored, his mind remained heavily burdened by the deep psychological scars inflicted during 7 arduous years of unjust confinement. The constant vigilance and extreme stress of surviving in such a harsh, unpredictable environment left him grappling with severe trauma. Simple everyday occurrences, loud noises, crowded spaces, or sudden movements triggered overwhelming anxiety, keeping his nervous system in a perpetual state of high alert. Recognizing that true liberation required healing his mind as well as clearing his name, Clarence bravely sought specialized medical help. He turned to advanced therapeutic procedures specifically designed to soothe the traumatized nervous system. Through patient, dedicated medical care and profound inner strength, the overwhelming shadow of anxiety began to gradually lift. This vital medical intervention allowed him to slowly reclaim his inner peace and fully embrace his second chance at life, free from the constant echoing memories of his past confinement. The journey toward comprehensive healing also required navigating profound and permanent changes in his personal life. The immense pressure, the agonizing years of separation, and the relentless emotional toll of their prolonged legal battle had irreversibly altered the dynamic of his marriage to Melinda. Acknowledging the deep, fundamental transformation they had both undergone during those lost years, the couple eventually made the difficult but necessary decision to gently close the chapter on their marriage. However, this transition was entirely devoid of bitterness or resentment. Instead, it beautifully evolved into an enduring, unshakable friendship built upon a solid foundation of absolute mutual respect and shared history. Though they no longer walked the same path as husband and wife, Clarence and Melinda remained an essential, inseparable part of each other's lives. They continued to view one another as profound confidants and lifelong soulmates, forever bound by the extraordinary historical battle they fought and won together, against all odds. Perhaps the most poignant and beautiful milestone in Clarence's journey of healing was his deeply emotional reunion with his niece, Brooke. Now a young adult, Brooke had spent her formative years carrying an agonizing, crushing burden of guilt, endlessly tormented by the role her confused, coerced childhood testimony had played in his unjust sentencing. When they finally stood face to face, the heavy weight of those lost years hung in the air. Yet Clarence offered absolutely no anger, judgment, or blame. In a profound display of human grace, he gently embraced her, offering the ultimate reassurance her soul desperately needed. He softly and firmly affirmed that he had never, not even for a single day, held any resentment toward her. He understood deeply that she was merely a vulnerable, terrified child, manipulated by circumstances and adults far beyond her control. This incredible, selfless act of forgiveness lifted the crushing weight from Brooke's shoulders, allowing both of them to truly heal. Refusing to let his tragedy define his future, Clarence chose to channel his painful experiences into a powerful force for global good. He established a dedicated scholarship fund aimed at supporting legal education and assisting the very organizations that tirelessly fight to exonerate the wrongfully convicted. By transforming his darkest days into a brilliant beacon of hope for others, Clarence ensured that his ultimate legacy would not be one of suffering, but of unparalleled resilience, boundless compassion, and the enduring power of profound human forgiveness.